I have genuinely wanted to visit this place for such a long time. We're talking years. I mean, just look at it. It's absolutely stunning. It's black and white timber, which I'm told, obviously it looks Tudor, but I'm told it was actually made by the Victorians to give it that spooky vibe that they loved. And it's not just the looks. It's got ghosts. Apparently there's 13 ghosts at least that reside in this hall. There are tales of witchcraft. So even, you know, like everybody remembers the Pendle witch trials. Well, you do if you're from the UK. The Pendle witch trials. Well, there was also the Salmesbury witch trials, which were around this as well. And then we've got priests being beheaded. We've got suicides. We've got murders. There's lots and lots of dark history, executions, all sorts of stuff that we're hopefully going to cover in this video. But I mean, just look at that. Who is excited to get inside and have a look? Nestled in the village of Salmesbury between Preston and Blackburn in Lancashire, this hall, which shares its name with the village, was built in 1325. Over the centuries it has been many things, including a pub, a boarding school, and perhaps most famously, the home of the influential Southworth family. Like many of our historic houses in Britain, the hall was once destined for demolition, but thankfully in 1925 this remarkable medieval manor house was saved. Today it is a Grade 1 listed building administered by a charitable trust, which means we can still admire its darkly enchanting appearance, rather than looking at yet another uniform and slightly soulless housing estate. Now don't get me wrong, we all need to live somewhere, but praise be to those who dug their heels in over this one. It would have been a crime to lose a building like this. And I'm relieved because they didn't just save one of Lancashire's most distinctive historic buildings from extinction, they saved the ghosts too. All 13 of them apparently. So where are we if you're not from the UK or you don't know Lancashire very well? Well, we're not far from Preston, which is where we did the Preston video last week for the Preston Bannister doll story. Now, Samlesbury Hall is very, very old. I think there's parts of it date back to sort of 1325. And it is a very historic house. Funnily enough, Charles Dickens was meant to have stayed here. Now, Charles Dickens, obviously he did like his ghost stories, came and stayed the night here, I believe, to see whether it really was a haunted house. They wanted to stay in a real one. So that's just a little bit of a fun fact for you. Anyway, what else? So I first came across it really when I started looking into the Pendle witch trials, because they had the Salmesbury witch trials here, which are a lot less known, but still brutal. I mean, the accusations that were getting thrown around, there were accusations of cannibalism, murder, obviously witchcraft and all sorts of malicious things. So it was really, really difficult time, but that obviously does tail into the fact that there was a Catholic family here as well. It was obviously difficult in the country as a whole. Now, before I get cracking off, let me just very quickly say a massive thank you to everybody that supports the channel by liking, commenting, subscribing and sharing, and especially those that are pressing the hype button. It doesn't cost you anything, by the way, if you want to press the hype button. It just massively helps the channel out. So I just want to say thank you, because you are all really helping this channel to grow. It's really, really helping me out. And if you are new here, I'm Claire, this is the Wanderlust Way. Please do subscribe, because we go on lots of adventures and I look for more stories like this, and there's usually a video every week for you to watch. So, and it's free to subscribe. Anyway, that is enough waffle. Let's wander. Right then, so then let's talk about ghosts, because let's face it, that's what a lot of you have probably clicked on this video for. Now, there are 13 ghosts meant to be here, which is just what I wanted to find out when I knew I was going to be visiting here alone. So wish me luck with that. Anyway, I've had to write them down because there's too many for me to possibly remember. So we've got number 1, the White Lady. She's the most famous ghost here. There's loads of white ladies, isn't there? What it is about the ladies that walking around in white, they seem to keep popping up in all these historic houses. Number 2, we've got her murdered lover. We'll get to the story shortly. Number 3, we've got a decapitated priest. Number 4, Sir John Southworth. So he was a member of this family. He was executed in London. We will get to him. Number 5, a poltergeist. Number 6, the face in the fire. Number 7, the phantom doorbell. So that's one obviously people have been hearing. Number 8, this is one I'd quite like to see, the ghost dog. Then we've got number 9, the rose lady. I imagine that's a scent one where you're smelling roses. Number 10, William Harrison. Now he was a suicide victim. I believe he shot himself in the hall in the 19th century. Number 11, we've got the phantom hearse. Again, that's one I wouldn't mind seeing. Number 12, the accused witches, and we will get to the Lancashire witch trials shortly. And number 13, some school children from when this place was a school, and a couple have been seen dragging the school children. So technically, if there's more than one school child, then it makes more than 13 ghosts. So yeah, pretty ghost greedy here. The first published account dates back to a book written in 1873, and I did look when I was looking online for some more history, and I looked at their official website, and they do actually have like a little contact form. So if you come and visit and you see something or experience something, you can send it off to them. So they must be keeping a register somewhere. It'd be really interesting to know how many reports and sightings they get on a regular basis. The word on the street, and on the Hall's own website of course, is that this place is never truly empty. You might find yourself here on a quiet day, with a few other visitors poking their noses around, but don't assume you're always alone. That creaky floorboard, that whisper by the window, the scent of roses where there are none, perhaps even the faint metallic taste of blood in your mouth as you approach the priest room. According to local law, they're not nothing at all. They're the ghostly reminders of those who came before. The most famous ghost is of course the White Lady. If you've watched any TV shows, read any paranormal books, or binged on any other YouTube episodes on her subject, chances are she's been the main headline act. They've even dedicated a whole room to her story here, which I promise to show you soon. But I'm not going to start with Dorothea. Yes, her story is tragic, and yes, there is a chance her ghostly spirit is still causing the hair on people's neck to stand up. But for this episode, I'm going to give the underdogs a chance. Not the witch ghosts or the priest ghosts either. We'll come back to them later. No, let's first talk about the rest of them. Those that lurk in the shadows and refuse to disappear into forgotten memories. Salmesbury Hall is a 14th century timber-framed manor house. Today it is widely regarded as one of the most haunted locations in Great Britain, and has featured on both Most Haunted and Ghost Hunters International. It will come as no surprise to you then that external ghost hunting companies occasionally run lights-out investigations here, while the hall itself, still run by a charitable trust, helps keep the coffers topped up with torchlight tours and Victorian ghost hunts, allowing visitors to become part of Samlesbury Hall's haunted heritage for themselves. According to the Bolton News, among the many reported apparitions are sightings of a phantom funeral procession. 2 separate witnesses are said to have seen a 6-horse carriage driven by a man with missing teeth and a patch over one eye. In more recent times, an employee claimed to have heard the sounds of a funeral taking place in the same area. Now, if you want to dig deep on this subject on the internet, you will find lots of fascinating stories. In a Reddit post, a former worker at Salmesbury Hall described an encounter with a mysterious little girl. While cleaning the accommodation huts one rainy day, she heard a knock at the door. Nobody appeared to be outside, but when they turned around, they caught sight of a young girl reflected in a mirror behind them. She had pale skin, dark hair tied back with a ribbon, and wore what appeared to be an old-fashioned dress. A short while later, she appeared at the door and politely asked for help getting into one of the nearby huts, explaining that her mother had forgotten to leave her a key. The worker unlocked the hut and thought little of it, until later, when they checked their cleaning schedule and realised the accommodation should have been empty. When they returned, the door was locked. The little girl had vanished. The worker never saw the child again and remained convinced that whoever or whatever they had spoken to that day was not an ordinary little girl. What's interesting is that she's not the only strange child sighted reported here. The manor house did indeed operate as a school from 1850, when the historic building was transformed into a co-educational boarding school run by headmistress Mary Ann Harrison. She established an institute at the hall based on the educational philosophy of Johann Heinrich Pestalozzi, often described as the father of modern education. Rather than harsh discipline and rigid teaching methods, the emphasis was placed on developing the whole child through practical learning, curiosity and personal growth. So this wasn't quite the grim Victorian boarding school that might first spring to mind. If what was written on paper played out in reality, perhaps the children here were happy, and maybe that's why they keep coming back, peering through the windows, tiptoeing across the gravel and appearing in mirrors to ask for spare keys. On the hall's Facebook page, I came across a video sharing ghost reports from staff, and it appears unusual activity is not uncommon. Objects moving, things being thrown, the sense of unseen children nearby, voices in empty rooms and cold breath felt on the backs of necks. All the sorts of things we've come to expect from old historic haunted houses on this channel. Now, there have been many tragic events in the hall's history, and we'll cover some of them today, but one in particular could potentially explain a handful of the sightings reported here. It involves a tragedy that befell the Harrison family. Joseph Harrison was a prominent Blackburn industrialist who purchased the hall in 1862 and carried out a number of renovations. In January 1879, his eldest son William suffered a serious fall on ice, sustaining traumatic injuries to his head and fracturing his kneecap. The accident affected his daily life and, according to reports, he gradually descended into a deep depression. Sadly, the year was about to get worse. Just months later, William's beloved dog was bitten by a rabid animal. At first he remained hopeful, but as his pet began showing symptoms of hydrophobia, fear and despair, reportedly began to creep in. Not long afterwards, William was found dead from a shotgun wound. Rumours quickly spread that he had taken his own life. His sister insisted it must have been an accident and believed he had somehow shot himself while preparing to put the dog down. His brother Henry also doubted the suicide theory, although he did admit that William had never truly been the same since his accident. Is William responsible for the reports of ladies' hair being touched in the hall? Is his dog the animal some claim to have seen wandering the corridors? And could it be his funeral procession that has been heard and even seen crossing the grounds? I suppose we will never truly know.
Salmesbury Hall was built by the Southworth family. Now, they were a leading Catholic family. I believe there were two main ones in the Lancashire area, and they were one of them. And obviously, when Henry VIII broke from the Pope, they remained loyal to the Roman Catholic faith, which was admirable, I suppose, in some ways, but in many ways it made their life very, very dangerous.
The Southworth family were one of the leading Catholic families in this part of Lancashire, and for generations that wasn't particularly unusual. England had been a Catholic country for centuries. Then everything changed. In the 1530s, King Henry VIII broke away from the authority of the Pope in Rome and created what would eventually become the Church of England. At first glance, that might sound like little more than a disagreement between powerful men. But for ordinary families, it had very real consequences. Imagine being told that the faith your parents had followed, your grandparents had followed, and generations before them had followed, was suddenly no longer acceptable. All because the king wanted a divorce, wanted to marry somebody else, and the Pope basically said no. Some people embraced the changes, others did not. The Southworths were among those who remained loyal to the old religion. Now, contrary to what Hollywood might have us believe, this wasn't a simple case of Catholics and Protestants marching around with swords every 5 minutes, but it was a time of suspicion, fear and shifting loyalties. Depending on who happened to be sitting on the throne, practicing the wrong faith could range from inconvenient to extremely dangerous. As a result, wealthy Catholic families often found themselves walking a very careful line. And that is where Salmesbury Hall enters the story. This wasn't simply a family home. It became a place where Catholic worship could continue behind closed doors. Secret masses were said to take place away from prying eyes, while travelling priests were given shelter despite the risks involved. Today, visitors can still see evidence of those troubled times. Hidden within the fabric of the building are priest holes, concealed spaces designed to hide Catholic clergy if the authorities arrived unexpectedly. Some were little more than cramped voids inside walls where a person might remain silent for hours while soldiers searched the property around them. Just imagine that for a moment. No warning, no escape route, just the sound of boots on wooden floorboards as armed men searched the house room by room. If discovered, the consequences could be severe. And according to local legend, one priest was not fortunate enough to escape. Information displayed within the hall tells the story of a Catholic priest discovered hiding here in around 1555. According to the tale, soldiers dragged him from his hiding place and beheaded him on the spot. But the legend didn't end with the priest's death. Today, many believe his spirit still lingers within the hall. The priest room is said to be one of the most active locations in the building. Visitors have reported strange sensations there, while others claim to have seen the apparition of a priest wandering the room. Then there is the blood stain. According to the story, a dark stain appeared on the floor where the priest fell. Later owners reportedly replaced the floorboards, only for the stain to return once again. True or not, it's exactly the kind of tale that thrives in a place like Samlesbury Hall, a house built on secrets, faith and fear. And as we'll soon discover, the Southworth family's connection to Catholicism would ultimately have consequences far beyond these walls.
What makes this hall especially fascinating is that it wasn't just a home, it was a Catholic stronghold. Families from across Lancashire would use this as a base, so there would be secret masses held here, there would be priests put into hiding, into priest holes. We'll look at some of those. And one member of the family himself, John Southworth, he was born here, and yet he was actually executed in London at Tyburn for being a Catholic.
One member of the Southworth family would ultimately pay the highest possible price for his faith. His name was John Southworth. Born here at Salmesbury Hall in 1592, John grew up in that dangerous Catholic world we've just been talking about. His family remained loyal to the old religion, paying heavy fines rather than abandoning their beliefs. And as a young man, John chose a path that would place him directly in the sights of the authorities. He travelled overseas to study at the English College in northern France, where English Catholic priests were trained before returning home to minister in secret. By this point, English law had already declared it an act of treason for a Catholic priest to return to England. Not murder, not espionage, not plotting against the crown, simply being a priest. Pretty dangerous stuff. But he knew the risks, and despite those, he was ordained in 1618 and returned home. Now, what I find interesting about John is that he wasn't some grand political figure or rebel plotting against the government. By all accounts, he genuinely believed people needed his help. During outbreaks of plague in Westminster, while many people were fleeing the city in fear, John stayed behind. He worked amongst the sick and the dying, helping families and administering the sacraments to those facing their final hours. The work earned him the nickname the parish priest of Westminster. Now, of course, being a Catholic priest in England meant trouble was never far away. John was arrested repeatedly throughout his life. He spent time in Lancaster Castle, was imprisoned in London's notorious Clink prison, sentenced to death more than once, and even deported to France. Now, thanks to powerful supporters, including Queen Henrietta Maria, he somehow managed to escape execution time and time again. Most people would probably have taken the hint, but John seems to have viewed matters rather differently. Despite the prison cells, the court appearances, and the ever-present threat of death, he continued his work for decades. Then, in 1654, his luck finally ran out. Aged 62, John was arrested once more and brought before the Old Bailey in London. By this stage, there was a reasonable chance he could have escaped with his life. The authorities were becoming increasingly reluctant to execute Catholic priests, and a lesser punishment was entirely possible. There was just one problem. John refused to deny who he was. When asked whether he was a Catholic priest, he admitted it openly. The sentence handed down was one of the most horrific in English legal history. Hanged, drawn and quartered. The condemned man would be dragged through the streets, hanged but cut down before death, then disembowelled and finally cut into pieces. This isn't merely an execution, it's a spectacle. It's a warning, it's a message. Now, on the 28th of June 1654, John Southworth was taken to Tyburn, close to where Marble Arch stands today. As he looked upon the gallows, he reportedly declared, "This gallows I look on as his cross, which I gladly take to follow my dear Saviour." Shortly afterwards, the Lancashire priest from Samlesbury Hall became the last secular Catholic priest in England to suffer that terrible fate. But strangely, the story gets even stranger after his death. The Spanish ambassador purchased John's body for 40 guineas. His remains were stitched back together, embalmed and returned to the English College in France. Then, during the upheaval of the French Revolution, the coffin was hidden in an unmarked grave and its location gradually forgotten. And there it remained for more than a century, until 1927, when workmen demolishing part of the old college uncovered human remains and made an extraordinary discovery. The body of John Southworth had been found once again. Today, his remains they rest in Westminster Cathedral. And while visitors come to Samlesbury Hall searching for ghost stories, few probably realise that one of the hall's most remarkable tales belongs not to a ghost at all, but to a man who spent his life helping others, met one of England's most gruesome deaths, and somehow managed to return from the grave nearly 3 centuries later.
Now let's talk witch trials, because this place became part of the wider Lancashire witch trials that took over the country in the 1612, I believe it was. So you had the Pendle witch trials, you had the Salmesbury witch trials. And why this was important is because there were 3 women taken from Salmesbury. Now one of them was a member of this family, the Southworth family, and they were accused by a very young girl. Now I think she was the daughter of the gardener. I think, if anybody knows different, please let me know. Anyway, she accused them of terrible things. One of the worst things she accused them was stealing a baby and boiling it and eating its skin, I believe, and then making ointment out of the fats and stuff. These were terrible, terrible things that these ladies were being accused of. And again, it all boiled down to religion in the end. But yeah, let's have a little bit of a look at what the Salmesbury witch trials were all about.
If you've already joined me on the previous video when we did the Pendle witch trials, you'll know that 1612 was not a particularly good year to be accused of witchcraft in Lancashire. And Salmesbury Hall found itself caught right in the middle of that. One of the accused was Jane Southworth, the widowed daughter-in-law of the Southworth family. What makes her story so fascinating isn't the witchcraft, it's the family feud lurking beneath it. As we now know, by the early 17th century, the Southworths had become one of Lancashire's best-known Catholic families. Yet Jane and her husband chose a different path. Rather than remaining loyal to the old religion, they began attending the Protestant church. Oh dear. Now that decision appears to have caused deep divisions within the family. Her in-laws were not happy. According to testimony given years later, the elderly Sir John Southworth strongly disliked Jane and is said to have claimed that she had somehow bewitched his grandson. Whether he truly believed that or whether it was simply the bitterness of a family dispute, it's impossible to know. What we do know is that Jane's husband died in 1612, and suddenly she's a widow. She's got her husband gone, she's no longer got that one person that's most likely to defend her.
Then, that's when the accusations started coming. The main witness was a 14-year-old girl called Grace Sowerbutts, and the stories she told were utterly extraordinary. Grace accused Jane Southworth, plus her own grandmother, Janet Byerley, and her aunt, Ellen Byerley, of witchcraft. According to her testimony, the women could transform themselves into strange creatures, meet with dark supernatural beings, and gather at night beside the River Ribble. But the allegations became even darker than that, because Grace claimed the women had stolen a baby from its sleeping parents, driven a nail through its navel, and fed upon its blood. After the child died, she allegedly told them that they dug up the body from the churchyard, cooked the corpse, and boiled the bones down into an ointment that allowed them to change shape. She also claimed the women gathered by the river at night, dancing with mysterious black figures before being dragged to the ground where they were violated by dark forces. I mean, it's an absolutely horrifying story, and that's precisely why people believed it. Today, the accusations sound absurd, but 17th century England was awash with sensational tales of witchcraft. Cheap pamphlets circulated stories of witches flying through the night, transforming into animals, murdering children, and making pacts with the devil. Fear sold copies then just as effectively as it does now. Against that backdrop, Grace's testimony would have sounded terrifyingly convincing. The women were arrested and taken to Lancaster Castle to stand trial. Now, had this been Pendle, this might have been the end of the story. But something unexpected happened. Jane apparently insisted that the young girl's testimony be scrutinised more closely. And thankfully, they listened, and they did, and the case began to collapse. Under questioning, Grace's account started to unravel. Contradictions emerged, details changed, and the judges became increasingly suspicious. Eventually, the teenager admitted that the accusations were false. According to the trial records, she confessed that a Catholic priest known as Master Thompson had coached her testimony. Now, historians generally believe this was Christopher Southworth, a Catholic priest connected to the Southworth family. And suddenly, the entire case looks rather different, because beneath all the stories of shape-shifting, demons and witchcraft lurked something much more familiar: religion, resentment, and a family that's divided. Jane Southworth and the other accused women had abandoned Catholicism and begun attending the Protestant church. Some historians believe the witchcraft accusations were less about sorcery and more about punishing those who had turned their backs on the old faith. Now, if that's true, then the real danger facing Jane Southworth wasn't witchcraft at all. It was being on the wrong side of a bitter family and religious dispute. But thankfully for Jane, Janet and Ellen, the plot failed, and all three women were acquitted. The Pendle witches, tried during the same assizes at Lancaster, would not be so fortunate. Standing here today, it's strange to think that one of the most famous stories connected to Samlesbury Hall wasn't really about witches at all. It was about suspicion, division, and what can happen when fear is weaponised against people who are meant to be family.
One of the most famous ghost stories associated with this place is, of course, the White Lady. Now, obviously, there's a few halls got a White Lady, but this one has a real historical connection because she was named Dorothy Southworth. She was the daughter of the family that was living here at the time, and she fell in love with a Protestant boy, which is not a good thing when you are a Catholic.
Now we finally arrived at the hall's most famous ghost, the White Lady. All the best historic houses have at least one lady to haunt their halls, and this place is no different. According to local legend, she was Lady Dorothea Southworth, the daughter of Sir John Southworth. Now this is where it can get a bit confusing because there are a lot of Johns in the family tree. So no, it's not Saint John that we just learned about, the one that got executed. It's the John who was the High Sheriff of Lancashire. So, back to the story, which, like many ghost stories, it begins with love and ends in tragedy.
Dorothea is said to have fallen in love with a handsome young man from nearby Horton Tower. Unfortunately for the couple, there was one rather significant problem: religion. By now you'll have noticed that religion had a habit of causing trouble around here. The Southworth family remained fiercely Catholic, whilst the de Hortons had embraced the Protestant faith. Sir John was reportedly horrified by the relationship and forbade his daughter from seeing the young man again. The pair, being young and in love, of course ignored him. Under the cover of darkness, they continued to meet in secret, gathering in an arbour within the grounds of the hall and eventually making plans to run away together. And it might have worked had somebody not been listening, because according to the legend, Dorothea's brother overheard the plans and reported them to his father. Furious, Sir John ordered his son to intercept the young couple and put an end to the relationship once and for all. Now, what happens next depends on which version of the story you read, but none of them, of course, are going to end happily. One account claims that a confrontation took place in the grounds beneath Dorothea's window. Swords were drawn, tempers flared, and before the night was over, 3 men lay dead. Dorothea had watched the entire scene unfold from her bedroom. Moonlight glinting on steel, the clash of blades, the man she loved bleeding to death in the darkness below. Unable to bear the grief, she is said to have thrown herself from the window and joined him in death. And then there's a version that tells a slightly different story. Rather than taking her own life, Dorothea was sent away to a convent in France, where she slowly lost her sanity and died far from the home she loved. Whichever version you choose to believe, there is one rather awkward problem. Nobody has ever found definitive proof that Dorothea Southworth actually existed. Some believe all mention of her was deliberately erased by her family. Others suggest the entire tale was invented centuries later. And perhaps that would be the end of the story, just another tragic Lancashire legend. Except for one thing. Centuries later, workmen carrying out excavations around the hall reportedly uncovered the remains of 3 human skeletons. 3. That's exactly the same number said to have died beneath Dorothea's window on that moonlit night. The remains were never properly identified and quickly deteriorated once exposed to the air, taking their secrets with them. But the discovery was enough to make people wonder, enough to make old stories feel a little less like stories, and enough to keep Dorothea's legend alive. Because people continued to see her. A pale woman dressed in white wandering the grounds, a lonely figure gliding through the long gallery, a silent apparition appearing where no living person should be, and some described her as beautiful, but others reported a sickly, almost green complexion, earning her the nickname Sickly Dorothy. She's even been said to haunt the nearby road, having been seen by bus drivers and car motorists alike, with one claiming he had to swerve to avoid hitting a woman standing in the road, only to discover there was nobody there. Today the hall embraces the legend, and they've got a room dedicated to what Dorothea's chamber might have looked like. Might. It is a curious world, because after all these centuries, nobody really knows whether Dorothea was real, whether the story happened at all, or whether grief, rumour and folklore somehow became tangled together over time. Yet the sightings do continue. And if you find yourself wandering these corridors after dark, catching sight of a pale figure disappearing around a corner, I doubt the question running through your mind will be whether historians can verify her existence. I think you'll be far more concerned with where she went.
So that is it. Thank you to everybody for joining me on this week's Wander. A massive thank you to Salmesbury Hall for giving me permission to make a film here. And also, I want to say, because I've never been before, so I've had a really good look round, they do some really cool events. Now, it's absolutely free to get into as a museum. I'll put down the opening times and days down here. But the events look really interesting. I think there's one at Christmas where it's like a ghost
ghost hunt, ghost walk thing. Then there's a Tudor thing, I think, as well. So I'll pop some links down below. What I'll do is I'll pop a link to their website, and then if you're interested in that sort of thing, then you might want to go and check it out. Right, okay, so please give the video a like if you've got this far. Please subscribe if you haven't, it's completely free. Please give it a hype if you can, and please come along to next week's Wander, which I'll drop a few more details later on about what that is going to be all about. So until next week, stay safe, stay curious, and don't have nightmares.